All right. Hello, everybody. I'm here with Conrad Shaw and Josh Worth, co-founders of Commingle, and we've been doing a space mostly on Wednesdays on Twitter/X, and we've decided to move to this format, doing actual video podcast instead of the audio only kind of space. And this is our first time doing this and recording the episode like this. So bear with us as we learn the ins and outs of this. As we go forward, we'll also be live streaming to lots of different platforms. Aside from Twitter, will be one of them, but also YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook and others. This time we'll just be on our own doing our discussion. But yeah, let's go forward and we'll start this off with our new intro song, and
which ones
we'll go from there.
This intro music is AI generated. Love it or hate it, no one was compensated. One more artist, one is where their money will come from. One more example of the need for basic income.
Nice.
So
Fantastic.
Maybe we need a AI generated intro video to go with it at this point.
Yeah, watching my face listening to that song was uncomfortable.
Yeah. When we edit this, we can put an image in there, and then hopefully at some point have like some kind of video for that.
I'd be fine if we just put an AI generated face over me the whole time. I could put on some little avatar,
like different emoji faces.
Yeah, I'll just be like an emoji face sitting there nodding.
I think it'd be fun too, just to even like show the lyrics, like even the home like a little bouncing ball
with a little
going on, just
ball.
so everyone like knows what the lyrics are because they're so cleverly written. Josh, by the way, is responsible for that.
Yeah, those were written by a human. It was created by a computer, but written by a human, which make of that what you will.
And that was using Suno.ai, right?
Is that what it's called? Yeah. Or Udio. Udio.
Oh, was it the other one instead of... Yeah. They're both pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have been really inspired by this Suno thing. I've got one guy that sends me music all the time. He's writing these lyrics that I told him, like, I'm not that big of a fan of most of anything you've sent me, but he keeps sending it, and it's like, do you want to share this with all the influencers you know? And not really. I mean, I am scared of how quickly you're turning out music that, like, musically sounds all right, but it's hard to tell someone, it's like, I don't like your lyrics.
Yeah, that's a weird world that's happening right now.
Yeah, and I suppose I should have mentioned this at the very, very beginning. We'll have to sort this out with our intros. But aside from the intro music, clearly this is a show about basic income. Maybe it'll be called the Basic Income Show. Like, I don't know. We're welcoming viewer input as to what we should.
We could call ourselves the Universal Basic Guys.
Mm-hmm. That's
available.
That is a great segue to the first thing that we wanted to talk about today.
I mean, you are the UBI guy, Conrad. You have a copyright claim on this show.
Yeah, I might engage that if the show doesn't do that well. I might send a legal document. Yeah,
for those who aren't familiar with it, there's actually a show that is just launched. You can watch it on Hulu. It's brought to you by Fox, so you can watch it live on Fox, but you can stream it on Hulu. And the concept of the show is about basically a town that was reliant on this like hot dog factory, and it gets automated. So there's a basic income pilot there that provides $3,000 a month to those in the town, and they just use this, or will be using this apparently, to have these have kind of like a, I don't know, like a Family Guy-esque kind of show, mainly about two guys that are just doing kind of zany things or whatever with all their newfound time, and at least some ability to afford these zany antics.
Did you say you had a clip of the intro we could play? Because I haven't.
Yeah,
I didn't see the first couple of minutes.
Here's the clip.
Well, I used to work at a hot dog factory until them robots came along, and now there is no job for me.
I've got it queued up on Hulu if you want me to get
Thanks to UVI, now we're universal basic guy. It may not sound like much, but we're still gonna try. We're just universal basic guy.
I'm just curious. I want to go back to this part where it had the newspaper, just to see if we can read what that said.
Yeah, is everyone in town getting it, or just like specific people who lost their hot dog job? Because then they're not really understanding UBI.
Right. Okay. Let's see if you can see that.
Employees who lost their jobs to the AI will receive $3,000 a month. So they're kind of treating it like unemployment. That's disappointing.
Yeah, I in press releases earlier, I had read that the entire town gets it, but maybe that was just like an assumption or misunderstanding. But it does look like, according to this like freeze screen, that it's just for those who lose their jobs. And I had heard that version of it before too.
I think we may be the only people that are freeze framing on this this particular frame and reading the article that they've written to go with this funny joke here.
It's important. Program design is important.
I know.
It's funny. It's like essentially it's key to knowing that this is not actually a UBI TV show. It seems like it is a
So what's interesting, I
benefits TV show.
Yeah. But so I think what you can glean from it, the fact that somebody is able to make a show that is making direct reference to the term of universal basic income, like that says something pretty big right there. Like it means that the concept is commonplace enough that it can be even a joke, a pop cultural reference, right? Like we weren't there 10 years ago. So it is like it's a nice little indicator that the idea is becoming more popular.
But it also is a nice little indicator that the idea is becoming popular in a misunderstood way. Like people, this is what we deal with all the time as basic income advocates, and people like point to like unemployment or food stamps or welfare benefits as we know them and say, see, UBI doesn't work. That was UBI, and we have to go through the process of explaining how they're essentially the opposite sort of incentive structures, and that is disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, if the setup of the show, and again, it's funny that we're like already, I don't know, we're like those Star Trek fans who are like, let's really get into how the warp drive works, you know?
Yeah.
But if it's the case where only the people in the factory get $1,000 per month, then sure, like it's not going to be universal basic income. And I was really hoping, even when I first read about this, that if this was a pilot or where everyone in the town got this, then you could actually see people working their normal jobs and you know that they also got this basic income, in which case, like, you know, the town had more money or whatever, and you could still have that comedy of saying, like, look at this guy who's unemployed and he's got $3,000 per month, but like all these other people in the town are still going about their jobs, and now they're actually you know, have more to spend, and the town's like, you know, doing other things, but like these people are doing all these weird things. So you can still have that kind of comedy set up, even with that. But also, uh, if it would be interesting to see if they actually did a job. So let's say, you know, one of these brothers decides that it would be fun to like become an Uber driver or something, you know, and then there's like some Uber driving antics, and you could actually see from that, like there'd still be the comedy of getting into that, but then you'd be understanding that you don't lose that $3,000 per month for earning additional money through Uber. You know, this is not a typical unemployment program, and so are we going to see that kind of thing, you know, through this? I don't know. But so the next thing I wanted to bring up was this article. This was a review in the Hollywood Reporter about the show, because, you know, right now there's only the one episode available on Hulu to watch, but, you know, this reviewer watched this season and just like kind of gives a better idea of what you can expect from this 13 episode first season. And also, when I say first season, we already know that the show has been picked up for a second season, so they're actually already working on the second season, and they started work on the second season even before this first season aired. You know, we've been wondering what this show would end up looking like for months now, since we heard that it got a second season.
Yeah, and it started by people being worried, like, oh, it's on Fox, and is this going to be like some sort of a hit piece? And for me, it was like, okay, you can't really make a show, especially one that gets picked up for 2 seasons, unless it's interesting. And the only way to make it interesting, like, it's not an interesting show to just watch people, you know, being lazy and worthless, you know, for the whole episode, every episode. But I don't know, I'm suddenly a lot less optimistic about it. I just feel like it's just going to introduce a lot more times where I have to say again, well, that's not a UBI either. You know, it seems like it must be funny enough.
I mean,
if they
really,
picked it up for a second season.
It's describing a severance package, an indefinite severance package. Like, it really is not a universal basic income, but it is like the concept, the big concept of you've got extra money in your life to do with as you please. Like, I think that's the driving force, right? Like, which is as a concept is kind of what UBI is all about, right? You've got money, so you don't have to worry about other stuff. So now you can focus on the wacky hijinks that you want to do a show about, right?
But yeah, so the fact that you just said extra money, I think is interesting too, and this was brought up in this review, where, so I'll just read this paragraph about it. Despite a premise that would seem to touch on salient political issues, Universal Basic Guys has no interest in pointed social commentary. If anything, UBI functions as an excuse for it to avoid talking about anything too real. You never have to wonder why Mark isn't looking for a new gig or how he's paying for all his harebrained schemes when UBI is there to hand wave away your questions. And if you're wondering whether that money wouldn't just be replacing the paychecks he used to get from work, or whether some of his ideas wouldn't cost way more than $3,000 to execute, stop, you're already thinking about this way more than the show has.
Right.
So like when you said extra income, so I don't know what they were earning at this hot dog factory, but let's just assume
Okay.
that you've got like a median income. You know, like
Let's
you've got
do
a
exactly what the writer of this article
Right.
told us not to do.
Right.
Okay.
So let's assume
Mhm.
that you got a nice median income manufacturing job. You know, you're middle class thanks to this job that, you know, doesn't require a college education or whatever, and you're earning, say, 60,000 a year, and it's probably more than that. But let's just say that this is more like he was earning $5,000 per month, and loses his job, and the replacement is $3,000 a month. So now he's got $2,000 per month less in
Mhm.
order to pay for stuff. And yet he does all these hijinks.
He's
So
got 40 hours a week more.
right, so you've
to
got
do
the
hijinks.
time to do the hijinks,
Mhm.
but you actually have less money to do the hijinks. And so in the very first episode, which again is the only one available, spoiler alert, he goes out and buys a chimpanzee, and he buys it for his wife, and the joke is that it's a really cheap chimpanzee because this is like a chimp that was used in medical experiments, and it's basically on its last legs. So he buys it for $3,000, and so there again, it's not like he used the $3,000 per month to pay for any of their mortgage or rent or whatever. I'm guessing probably mortgage, or any food or anything like that. His wife is a nurse, so you know she's the breadwinner, now that he's unemployed. But he's still bringing in $3,000 per month, and again, he used to be bringing in $5,000 a month. So they have, as a family unit, you know, they needed a certain amount of money, and now they have less money. But then he goes out and spends his entire payment on a chimpanzee instead of any of like your basic needs. So like again, we're really
Yeah.
digging into this.
It's
into
not
the
really
Right.
details,
tethered.
but
It's
Yeah,
not
I mean,
really
like,
tethered
if
to the reality of
as
how
a
pissed off he
like
would be that he's not chipping in. It's like he's treating this new income as something that has no responsibility to put towards the house.
Mhm.
right.
Yeah, from like
what
a
was he doing
comedy
before?
Yeah, from a comedy writing perspective, like it actually probably would have been better to just have him like win the lottery or something, like some other reason why the character doesn't need to do any work anymore and now could do kind of whatever, can fuck around, right? Which is like that's the underlying premise of the show that's going to drive the wacky hijinks and the, you know, all the random ideas about like this guy trying to find some like new purpose. It's like it's
And then that's-
basically somebody with too much time on their hands is what
And
it
in that
is.
scenario, the lottery winner husband who's not using any of the lottery to help pay the rent, his nurse wife
Yeah.
is still paying the rent. It's like,
Mhm.
leave that motherfucker and get your half in the divorce. You know, like
Mhm.
what the hell?
Right, like are we to assume that again his $5,000 per month that he was getting, he wasn't putting towards like anything, and so like
Right.
his wife is paying for the rent and groceries and everything, but then like what was he doing with his $5,000 per month if he wasn't helping pay for rent and food? Yeah, it's
Especially
Right, yeah.
since he didn't have the time to blow it on hijinks. You know,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean that's actually a more the question of like what is he doing with the free time is actually better fodder for the comedy than what is he doing with the extra money. Right. He doesn't actually have extra money. Yeah. So yeah.
right. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's not
Yeah,
something he actually has.
I'm
Yeah.
so curious where it goes. Just the fact that it got picked up for a second season is like, yeah, how did that happen? I
Well, I
thought
think
when
it's
I was watching the
probably,
show, there
it's
were
probably
moments
a-
that were funny,
Yeah.
but nothing
But
that's
the writer's strike probably had something to do with it, just because if you're writing for animation, you're not part of the Writers Guild, as far as I know.
Oh, really?
So yeah,
Huh.
So they could probably been sitting there getting paid to work on 2 seasons. Wow,
That's interesting. There's
yeah.
something there that's like a meta industry level
Yeah.
thing about AI
I don't
and
know if
UBI.
that's the reason, but I do know that I think I know that writing for animation is different writing.
So the only reason that this show, if you're right about this, that this
Mhm.
show could be made, that they could have budget and time to have been writing this, it's because of an actor strike, largely caused by automation. That's
Mhm.
screwing over actors and writers' jobs, and a writer's strike.
Mhm.
And because of that automation, they were freed up to make a show about people getting a basic income
Losing their
because of
jobs.
automation.
Yeah.
Right.
And sort of, does that make them sort of like crossing the picket line, if that were the case?
Well, they are
Not
part of the
technically.
union, so yeah, technically they are not
Hmm.
beholden to the picket line.
We have some stuff like that with we hadn't introduced to this specific audience yet our projects and stuff, and maybe eventually we'll get better at that. But our docuseries, there is a lot of that sort of ins and outs of how do we fit within the industry and all the stuff going on. So like when all the actors and writer strikes are going on, one, we're a documentary, so we don't have much in the way of writing until you get to the edit.
Mhm.
And we don't have official writers who are in the Writers Guild. We have editors. It's so that's a different
Yeah,
setup.
well,
And
there's
then,
I mean, okay, so I just looked it up. It's the animation writers are represented by the Animation Guild, or the TAG, which is a separate union. So I don't know if that union had gone on strike with the WGA or SAG-AFTRA. They may have been part of it.
we hold out hope for this TV show to like get funny and learn more about UBI, or I'm
Yeah,
a
I mean,
little more
I'm
cynical, but I'm gonna keep watching it to see at least how I can feel about it and respond about it. Yeah.
yeah, I'm curious about the second season, especially too. It's maybe it's one of those examples of something where the first season has this concept, and you're introducing people to it. Again, like, just the mechanism of it is really just, it's like an excuse for being able to afford stuff. They can just write it off. You just kind of, you don't think about it. Whereas, like in The Simpsons, we're never asking that question, but it's part of the absurdity of it, where they're doing all these things and you just kind of don't ask where the money comes from to afford a lot of this stuff. Like, sure, he's got this job, but he's, there's crazy stuff that happens at The Simpsons, and you never really question it. And so in this show, it just seems like they're kind of just laying a base for this where you don't question it and you can have all this fun with it. So maybe in the second season, they can kind of get a little bit deeper into this, and maybe they do kind of explore more that's more legit basic income stuff. Like I said, where you can have an Uber job and it shows that you're earning income additionally, or maybe it does show that other people in the town have it, and so you kind of get a feel for that it's actually universal instead of not universal. Where
Yeah.
it's like you don't want to change the name to targeted basic income guys. Like that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, like I thought there would be more about like they're kind of living in this world where people are have this newfound freedom, right? Which is that premise is, there's something to it, but it wasn't real clear that that was the underlying idea behind the comedy. But it is like, as far as like what a show like this is doing to popularize the concept in people's minds is like, yeah, it's not getting into like the realities and the mechanics, but like the idea that a change in how the economy works can change how your whole like life works, right? Like,
Yeah.
that idea I think is pretty strong, and I think that's kind of what they're going for, is that they're like, once you take away this need to be working all the time, what do you do with your life, right? What do you do with yourself? How do you pass the time? And if you're a guy that just works at a hot dog factory, like, it's kind of funny. Yeah, what is this guy that is so used to being a working man doing now that he's suddenly been given this freedom? Like, it's kind of fun.
It is a good opportunity to ask sort of clever questions about purpose and things like that too. But it
Yeah,
also
like
tells me as we do our docuseries, I'm writing down like, okay, we need to have like maybe a little piece on popular examples of what people think is UBI that are not actually UBI, and just like go down the list and say, which things are and which things aren't.
Yeah, and I would also add too, again, like one of the things I'm concerned about, and also one of the things that I think would be good. So one of the things I'm concerned about is the amount. If it's good that people start thinking of basic income and what you can do, after your jobs are automated, kind of thing. But $3,000 per month is really high for a basic income. It is completely unrealistic anytime soon. Maybe an amount that high is realistic if we've actually automated like over 50% of the labor force, and we've like dramatically increased GDP thanks to this, and we can actually have that. But right now, that is just not realistic. And so, when we're talking about basic income, we're talking about around $1,000 per month. We're talking about like poverty line stuff. But if people are thinking basic income, like, oh, $1,000 per month isn't enough, it needs to be $3,000 per month, like we watched in Universal Basic Guys, then
Well,
Yeah.
I don't. They
that
they
could be
did. They
kind
would
of
have
a
had to
problem.
read the very fine print of the article in the credits that does say. It says AI-driven robotics technologies will receive $3,000 per month indefinitely in what advocates of UBI are calling an unprecedentedly high figure. So now, as an advocate of UBI, you are going on record as saying that yes, that is unprecedentedly high.
It is a high. There are people who there is a precedent for people like, no, it needs to be a full livable income, and I need to be able to take my kids to the opera because it's culture, and it's like that argument misses the importance of the universality and focusing on the number. But it like the way the 3,000 a month figure actually reminds me, it's even more like unemployment. It's like unemployment was during the pandemic. Basically, people got an
Yeah.
extra $600 a week plus their 400 or so ish a week from their basic benefits. So they're taking that same amount of money and tying it to the act of having lost your job. And I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out it's like if they got a job, they would lose it or something like that. But I'm curious about that. But
Yeah, I mean, that's
we write
the assumption
articles
here.
about how like this was a mistake to handle the pandemic by putting it all, giving people the support all through unemployment, and people still confuse the unemployment boosts during the pandemic with UBI regularly.
Yeah, when you insist on a really high basic income, you're imagining that there's no possible way to get some other job. And clearly these people, even though they lost their jobs thanks to a hot dog factory being automated, doesn't mean that there's no possible way for these people to get another job, to retrain, to go back to school, to reskill, and get another job. Instead, it's thinking that, okay, they're useless now. Here's $3,000 per month. It's almost treating them like they have like a disability or something, where they're just completely unable to earn any money. And then so here's $3,000 per month, and that's all you'll ever get. That's like not only a floor, it's a ceiling. And of course, that's not basic income. But on the plus side, like this episode hasn't aired yet, but I did notice through the trailers and stuff for the show that one of the things he appears to do in a future episode, I think, is to I think maybe he becomes a football coach for like the high school or something. So I don't know if that's correct or not, but it did look like there was like a volunteering aspect of this. So you have this $3,000 per month, and then he starts doing unpaid work via volunteering to help like kids or whatever. And I like that. Like that's a good positive thing to show that even though this person, we're assuming that they're incapable of earning, getting another job, that there's still like ways of contributing to society, being part of it, and doing this volunteer work, and even recognizing that that volunteer work is already going on, and having that income actually enables you to do that. So I don't know, I like that.
Yeah. And then the entrepreneurial side of things, it would be odd if they didn't like explore ways that these brothers and the people in the factory are trying to like take their money and turn it into more money, whether investing or starting businesses or having wacky schemes about like new companies they want to start up and stuff
Right.
like that.
Maybe they could do like a Breaking Bad parody where they both start making like crystal meth, but then they call it something else.
I did reach out to them and on LinkedIn and offer, like, I used to be a screenwriter and I'm an actor and I know about UBI, and so if you want me to write stuff, I would love to.
Hit them up for a job. Yeah.
I have not heard back.
Huh. Fools. Yeah. I noticed the first premise was kind of like they were making references to like the Tiger King and the Chimp Crazy documentaries. Like it just I don't know, it's just interesting to see like that UBI is being thrown in as like a cultural reference point that's at the level of like those shows that are like you can throw them out there without anybody like wondering what the heck you're talking about, right? Like they're making references to these very popular documentaries and that's fueling some of the comedy, right? And so I just think that like seeing the UBI at that level is kind of at least it's encouraging.
It might get us past that point where, like, with the very first order reactions, where like UBI, that sounds like a some sort of bowel condition or
and like you
syndrome.
Guys are having to like at pretty much every discussion like about UBI starts with the same old like, and for those unfamiliar with the concept, it is so and so. But it seems like you can almost skip that part. Right? Like this show was able to skip the explanation of like the broad stroke understanding of what it even stands for, right? Like I don't think they even had to spell out what UBI stood for in the intro song, right? But they just used UBI, the abbreviation.
Was it in the song? I will point out that I missed the first 2 minutes when I watched it. And so I watched the other 26 minutes, and there was not a single thing to let me know that this had anything to do with the UBI. It was just a couple of brothers that got a monkey and hijinks happened. So it was like, it's very subtle, I guess, the presence of the UBI and the way they think in terms of how it affects people's lives.
Yeah. But it's up there on a big stage. Yeah, it's like that Fox animation is like, I mean, that's where a lot of people get their information from. Like The Simpsons is for a long time, that was like where you could really, put your finger on the pulse of America is just by what jokes are running through The Simpsons. And it's not so much the case anymore with any animation or any sort of piece of writing, but like there's something to that.
Before we go on, I think this is fitting for talking about Simpsons. Okay. So yeah, just play this quick.
We'll do it. Fix it in post.
This isn't the way I pictured Alaska at all. Oh, that's better. Well, at least my poster didn't get torn.
Welcome to Alaska. Here's $1,000.
Well, it's about time. For what?
We pay every resident $1,000 to allow the oil companies to ravage our state's natural beauty.
I'm home.
Oh, thanks.
That was pretty old, right? That was like from the Simpsons movie.
Yeah, it was from the Simpsons movie. I always think of that. That's the Simpsons Basic Income reference.
That's fun.
That's the one they've had.
I'm sure they've had other ones, right? No?
I'm not aware of maybe they've won like the lottery or whatever, but like Alaska is an actual basic income, so him getting a check for entering Alaska, I think, is the Simpsons reference.
That's fun.
So the next thing that I thought we could discuss was this the recent news out of the UK, where they just recently voted on what's called the winter fuel payment, and this payment is around $400 per year, and it goes to all seniors. So it's like a bonus to, let's say, Social Security, and it's specifically for helping with the increase in energy cost during winter. And the Labour Party just came in; they won the elections, and for the first time in like 14 years, the Tory Party, the Conservatives over there in the UK, they massively lost. They went out of power. The Labour Party, which is kind of like the Democratic Party here in the US, over there, took over. And they're actually this Liberal Party, the Labour Party, is kind of doing what the Conservatives did even a while back, which is saying, all right, we got to tighten the belt. We're spending too much money. We've got to make cuts. They're pursuing this austerity agenda. And so one of the first things that they're doing is to target this payment to only those seniors who are, quote unquote, poor enough. And they're deciding that based on, if you're a senior and you're receiving welfare already there in the UK, then you'll get this bonus payment. But if you aren't, then you don't get that. But then there are some other ways that you could get it. But for the most part, they're trying to target it to those who are the poorest, and excluding all these people that are considered to have too high of incomes, even though they're all seniors. So, they've got fixed incomes. And
is it phased out, or is it suddenly gone, like over a certain level? Do you know?
I don't know. I think that they're just doing a cliff, but maybe it's some kind of high phase out rate. I don't know, but it's getting rid of it for a lot of people, and they're looking to save even just 1.5 billion pounds doing this. Not a whole lot of money. There's definitely other ways of coming up with an extra $1.5 billion for the UK budget, other than what is effectively raising taxes on seniors. Extremely unpopular, to do this, and it even made like the Conservatives look good, because the Conservatives tried to prevent that from happening. So even though the Conservatives had previously even, I think, mentioned wanting to do this, they came out and said, "Oh, let's prevent this from happening. You're hurting seniors," or whatever. So this even like helped Conservatives look good, and Labour Party look bad by doing this. I calculated too what it would cost to just add like a higher tax to come up with $1.5 billion, so that you could keep the actual universality for seniors, and instead utilize just like a surtax mechanism to basically slowly phase it out and actually spread the cost among the entire population, instead of what is effectively just increasing taxes on seniors instead of everybody. And so if you increase taxes on everybody instead of just seniors, you could actually accomplish the same thing with just a 0.12% income tax increase. So very, very small. It's doing literally nothing. It's just an unpopular policy to do. But I wanted to mention this just because of this happening over the past week in the UK, there's been this debate about targeting versus universality, and you've had people, even those on the left and the Green Party and stuff, talking about how a better way to go about this is to keep the universality and just raise taxes. And so this logic just, of course, is the basic income logic. It's you don't want to means test the payment. You want to do a fully universal payment and then accomplish any kind of phase out from the rich via the tax system with just an additional tax of some kind.
I can't tell who's like if it's high level chess or low level chess being played and who's doing it, like in terms of the politics of the thing. Having the Tories come out against or start seemingly implying that they're for universality and universal programs, and or having the Labor Party look bad, but then have this being introduced into the discussion in a way that's broader, that the universality, like is someone intentionally taking a hit on on their politics?
It kind of seems like it's pretty low level chess. Like it's just people like reacting to the immediate things. Like we need to like embrace this idea of austerity more and saving money. So we're going to really like show that we're like, pinching up the purse strings. And then somebody else is like, well, but we need to like, really make sure our focus is on making sure the money's getting to people who actually need it. And that's how we're going to save money. So I don't think anybody really is getting what that's the bigger I think picture too. Is. Yeah,
I think the more we do trial and error of different things, in this low level chess way, and eventually, like a billion monkeys typing on a billion typewriters, we'll try something that works, and hopefully that's what sticks. That's sort of my theory of how UBI is going to happen. Is the first time someone implements a good universal basic income policy. It's going to obviously be a lot better for the people in that community, and it's going to be really politically difficult to even dream of challenging it. We just have to stumble into it, and just by getting it wrong,
right,
an infinite number of times first.
But this is a weird one because it does is somehow the payment is tied to like being cold. Like you're old and you're cold, so you should get some money, right? Like you can't afford to pay your heat, and that's not fair because you're old, and so we can't just freeze you. So there's like the motivation to even provide this is kind of like I don't know, it's well-meaning, but you're already sort of targeting to begin with, right? You're saying you have to be, just saying you have to be elderly is targeting your program. Like there's plenty of other people that aren't elderly that can't afford to pay their heat too, right? Like
sure, like the better way to do this is to acknowledge that in the winter energy is more expensive, so let's do a fully universal winter allowance benefit that provides everyone in the UK an extra $400 in November or December or whatever. And you just pair it with a tax so that it phases out. But I just wanted to read here just because you can see this argument where so on one hand it says, and we know that providing universal support to reach everyone who needs it is not only morally right, it is much cheaper than means testing. This plan should be scrapped and replaced with a wealth tax. And then, versus someone else who says, there are plenty of very wealthy pensioners who are getting transfers of £200, £300 if they're over 80 into their bank account and who don't need it. So it's right that we target the support on the poorest pensioners. I just want to emphasize again that the people who are insisting on targeting it and removing it from a lot of these pensioners, all you would have to do is to just increase the taxes on those specific people too, instead of getting rid of the payment. And it would make far more sense to just spread that out among everybody. And if you did that, then these people who are who you're saying are too wealthy, they would be paying more in new taxes than they would be getting in this payment. They'd still be getting it, but they'd be paying more than they're getting, in which case they're net payers. And that setup just makes so much more sense than this, where it's just bad politics to basically like lose the votes of all these pensioners that are considered to have too much money. And so the next time around they're going to be like, I don't like how you removed this payment. Whereas if you just hike their taxes by 0.12%, and they still got it, so they're still getting this in their bank account, just like they did before, and they're not going to notice this tiny tax increase spread through the whole year, spread through everybody. Then that is more politically salient. Like that just makes more sense to do from a political decision, in addition to economics. But we're still in this place where we're not figuring that out. There's just a lot of people on the left that are saying, no, we have to target it.
And just logistically, I think one of the big things we need to make clear to people, one way or the other, is that it's so much easier to target taxes than it is to target benefits. That's the whole crux of why universality is important, is because it saves you from having to target the benefits, and you can target the taxes instead.
Yeah.
I mean, really, isn't a better program just to take the money for the program and give it to the energy company and say, don't charge as much during the winter?
No,
it's actually like, I mean, couldn't you be doing that? Like, if that's the ultimate idea, is to reduce the cost of your heat payment, then
it depends. It's just like a tax credit sort of a situation where you only get as much as your taxes. Where if you have a good universalist sort of program like that, say it's paid for by the electric grid or by fossil fuels or whatever, and there's a tax coupled with it, there will be people on the bottom end of the spectrum that are not only just having their tax reduced, they're getting it, or their costs reduced, they're getting an extra support, they're getting an extra supplement to their income.
I would say so. The kind of the market answer to this too, which I agree with, is that it maintains the incentives to give people cash instead of subsidizing the cost, because then you can benefit by like reducing your usage in a way that's like real. You could kind of pocket a little bit more. You can just like reduce the heat or whatever, and you could have that cash for other stuff in a way that's different than just say spending a little bit less by doing the same thing. But there's like, I don't know, there's less of an incentive structure there. If you get cash and you have this reason to want to spend it on something else, then there's kind of this incentive to reduce your energy usage. Whereas,
Right.
And it's not the same thing. Whereas if you don't get cash and you just want to reduce your energy usage, it's I don't know, it works out a little bit differently.
Yeah, you don't want to bury the cost of something that has a negative externality, especially. You don't want it to seem like energy is just free and it's my right to just use as much energy as I want or use a certain amount of energy. You want the cost to be visible, so people are making the choice to spend the money that you're providing for this on as much energy as they need. I've seen interesting proposals and like sort of entertained proposals, like with the electric grid example, where if everyone sort of owned the revenue from the electric grid and it went back to everyone in equal share, then the people who are using far less energy would be getting a check rather than having a bill, and the people that are guzzling would be end up still paying. And one thing you could do in that paradigm, now that the revenue is going back to the users of the grid, is you could actually crank up electricity rates from 10 cents per kilowatt hour to 20 cents per kilowatt hour. And so what you're also doing is cranking up the check, right? So now every single kilowatt hour you save is more money that you're saving. And every single extra kilowatt hour that you're consuming is more money that it's costing you, but the same amount of electricity is effectively subsidized, and you're incentivizing people to be more conscientious consumers.
Yeah, the other part of it reminds me of what Iran did too, which is, Iran had these subsidized oil. So oil was really cheap in Iran, and you got like market people and economists saying you need to replace this with a cash payment. Just cash out that subsidy and use cash instead. And that's what they did. And it was essentially a universal basic income there in Iran for a short while, because at maximum, it reached like 96% of the population, I believe, this like monthly cash payment. And so aside from that being a basic income, what it did was it kind of discouraged the wastefulness of oil. So if you're a rich person, then if like gasoline is 25 cents a gallon, then you're just gonna drive all over the place and do drag racing and just burn oil and have a great old time without even thinking about the money because it's so cheap. Whereas if you instead cash it out, then they're getting some small amount just like everybody else. But now gasoline is whatever, $2, $3 a gallon or whatever, and there's like less reason to just burn through all that gas. So when they made that change, it was progressive in how it like reduced poverty, and it was also impactful for oil use reasons, in that it reduced oil usage at the top of the income spectrum. So if you translating that to this discussion, I would expect that if they subsidized the payment to reduce everybody's bill, then you would actually increase electricity usage, especially among those with higher incomes.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, but I guess like it actually kind of like even more clearly pinpoints the need for like the universality is actually a better approach than even like having the money tied to this cold winter idea, right? Like removing that, actually, if you just say here's just some money, we know that and it's coming seasonally for some reason, like then that is doing the same thing as addressing this issue of the, we don't like the idea of old people freezing, right?
Yeah, the idea of it's like
just stop worrying about the old people freezing and just give the money, right? Like stop even tying it to that concept.
Yeah, it's funny to me. People talk about the Sustainable Development Goals a lot. These like 17 or however many it is now development goals, where it's like we want to end poverty and stop hunger, and there's a ton of them, but all of them arguably sort of exist underneath poverty. It's just never really acknowledged in their framework that if you end poverty, you've also ended hunger. If you end poverty, you've also ended homelessness. If you end poverty, you've also like fixed a lot of these things, at least to a very great degree, and yet they put them up as if they're equal sorts of things. The thing about ending poverty, or I'd rather say economic insecurity, is that cash can be used for anything. So with oil and gas, you can only burn it, and that's all you can do. And if that's the plentiful resource that people are being subsidized in or provided, that's what they're going to do. And in the case of oil and gas, it's actually demonstrably negative. In the case of other things like in-kind aid, it's just less useful than cash. Like if we're giving food to people in boxes, like you get a box of peanut butter and crackers and whatever, the people who are allergic to peanut butter now have to go sell that peanut butter or trade it or something, create these, inefficient little black markets and things. But if you just gave them cash, it's so much more useful. When I was working in restaurants, it was very stark to me, like, oh, food stamps wouldn't be very helpful right now because when I go work at the restaurant, they feed me. Like, actually, food is an expense I don't deal with here. So if someone was offering me some sort of benefit in food because I was poor and low income or whatever, I'd be like, well, I can't really use this. I already have that taken care of, but I really could have used a new mattress. Sleeping on a 20-year-old futon I got off of Craigslist. It's like the sorts of things you can do with cash. If we can just learn to trust each other, are a million times more powerful.
Yeah, like a free mattress program to all employees probably would have worked for you, but not really been all that great for the people that already have a mattress. Like, oh, thanks for the mattress.
Right. And there's
kind of like people winning, like on Price is Right, where you see them like they win the big showcase showdown, and it's like, oh, I've got another dishwasher. Thank you.
Right.
I already had a dishwasher.
If you've got a million people with a million different needs, you can create a million different organizations that address each of the different needs, or you can create one thing that gives them cash, and then they're their own organizations.
Yeah, I can see that you can think of examples where they may be few and far between, but that already exist now with, let's say, the welfare programs that are benefits in kind. And so let's say you're low income, but you, for some reason, let's say you grow your own food, or you've got some, maybe you like hunt for your food or whatever. But let's say food really isn't your issue, even though like we say that everybody's basic need is needing to eat, but just because your income is low doesn't mean there's no possible way for you to eat, in which case cash is better than SNAP, because maybe for that particular person, they actually don't care about buying food in the grocery store. Like food isn't that issue for them. So for that person, cash definitely is far more effective. And even though it could be a case that's few and far between, they exist. Cash is always something that you could use for anything.
And if you give that person food stamps, they have to go through this process of, like, what happens commonly with food stamps is people will go and buy baby formula because it's a high value thing that they can resell later in a little sort of a black market to get 50 cents on the dollar for the cash value of that thing. Then they'll take that half as much money and go buy what they actually need with it.
Since you mentioned baby food too, that's a good segue into the next thing that I thought we could talk about, which is what's going on in the presidential race about the child tax credit. It's been really interesting to watch this kind of one-upsmanship going on, where Kamala is saying, all right, if I win, then I will push for the return of the 2021 child tax credit expansion. And that's what she was saying pretty immediately upon replacing Biden as the candidate. That was she was already talking about that pretty quickly. And for those who don't remember or like the numbers, then the existing CTC is $2,000 per year, and that's a yearly refundable tax credit, or not entirely fully refundable, but mostly refundable. And the 2021 expansion was $3,000 and $3,600, depending on age. So that was if you're a parent of someone who is 6 and under, then you'd get $300 per month. And if your kid was over 6, then that's $250 per month. So that's a higher amount, and it was paid monthly, and it was also fully refundable, which is really where most of the poverty reduction came from. So that reduced child poverty by 40% in 2021. And then when they let it expire, then poverty, greatly increased, again.
A thing to point out, if someone doesn't know what fully refundable means, maybe you can clarify if I don't know all the way. But as opposed to like a tax credit being like a reduction in how much taxes you owe, if it's fully refundable, it's also just a check straight to you, even if you're not paying taxes. It's not, if you have no income and pay no taxes, you still get that $300 a month. It's not like you have to earn enough to be paying in $300 in taxes to then be saved it. And that's the thing that like we see a lot of in the UBI world of, why give people UBI? Why not just reduce their taxes? It's because a lot of people, the people who need help the most, actually don't pay much in taxes because they have no income to pay taxes from. And so giving them a break on their taxes doesn't help at all,
Yeah. So I just wanted to get back to these amounts. So again, the existing tax credit is $2,000, and Kamala came out and was pushing $3,000 or $3,600 depending on age. And then interestingly, JD Vance comes out and says, well, I think that we should do $5,000 per year. And so there's not really any details in that. But what was interesting is that he basically saw the amount that Kamala was pushing and then said, no, we should do even more than that. So this kind of like arms race, let's say, started. And there's this analysis that you can find via Policy Engine that just did some quick number calculating, some quick crunching to see just how much the impact would be from this $5,000 per year child tax credit. And what's so interesting about this is, again, there's no details. So the guess is he talking about using current refundability or full refundability? Current refundability is, again, like you basically don't even get anything until you're earning enough income to get something. And so you're not reaching all of those people whose incomes are too low to get it. And if they did a $5,000 tax credit using the existing refundability structure, then a $5,000 per year tax credit would reduce child poverty by 1.2%. And so like really just show that it's not the increasing of the amount that has the child poverty impact. The reason that the 2021 child tax credit expansion was so effective was that it dropped that income requirement and reached everybody, even with incomes of $0. You could get this amount. And so that is where like all this child poverty punch comes from, is just from it's making sure that you no longer means test it at the bottom end. And then this analysis also looked at, all right, what if we did it fully refundable, just like we did with the 2021 expansion? And if they did that, you would reduce child poverty by 42%. So again, that's a huge reduction in child poverty. But interestingly, it's not that much more, again, than what we did in 2021 with that expansion. Again, that was around 40% child poverty reduction. And that was with $3,000 or $3,600, depending on age. And so again, you see that it really doesn't provide much more of an impact going from, $3,600 to $5,000, because all of the impact really comes from making it fully refundable and reaching all those people.
It's sort of shades of too, like the way people can think about universality. All of the impact comes from, it's not about the getting cash to people as much as it is about starting people with the cash and making sure nobody is missed. That's where all the efficiency comes in.
Yeah, exactly. It's just it's means testing versus universality, where even if we're just looking at the bottom end, like this phase-in part, which is they're referred to as trapezoid programs, and there's been this kind of infatuation with trapezoids where you means test the beginning part of this, the low end, and so that phases in, and then you get the full amount for a bit, and then that phases out. So these phase-ins are actually really bad policy design, in regards to just basically how nullifying the poverty impact is by using these phase-ins. It just doesn't. The reason for these phase-ins is because we don't want to reward laziness. Let's make sure that someone has some amount of income before we help them. And then the logic is they'll work more because we're actually helping them. But only if they work enough, But when you do that, poverty is not decreased.
And putting up these, we spend so much time with welfare as we know it and programs as we know it focused on making sure the wrong people don't get it than making sure the right people do get it. Yeah. And, there is an intent to hold everyone accountable, but what it really does is make sure mostly that the right people don't get it. And the impacts in the numbers, it's why our welfare programs today, if people fully understand them, suck. They suck very, very badly. And they're only arguably better than having nothing at all. But in the context of a universalist program being introduced, it's sort of a third rail for a lot of progressives and liberals to say that we would replace welfare programs that are targeted with a UBI that's universal. But that's the only way it really makes sense to do it. In the existence of a universal program, these other programs are only detrimental that if they introduce that kind of targeting and those barriers and those cliffs.
Yeah, and even when it comes to child tax credit, to its credit, it eliminated the phase-in, but you still have the phase-out. And so I don't like that part of the child tax credit. It would be better to just universalize it and again use taxes as your phase-out mechanism. And I was actually really impressed with Mitt Romney's proposal when he pitched that. I believe it was also in 2021. He was saying instead of making the child tax credit expansion permanent, that he proposed a fully universal, or I guess it wasn't. It was mostly universal. Sorry, it went up to, I believe it was $4,000 in income for a household, but for a phase out. So mostly universal, but not. But still, it's mostly a universal child allowance. And the other cool thing about that is it wasn't even through the IRS. He actually pitched going through the Social Security Administration, in which case you were just doing this payment to every parent for their kids. And that mechanism works really well, too, to make sure that people are getting the payment. Because even though the CTC was fully refundable, you have all these people that aren't filing taxes. And they needed a website, on the IRS where they encourage people to, go there and sign up, and they can get their payment. But it wasn't automatic. Whereas if you did this through the Social Security Administration, then someone who has a newborn, they're in the hospital, and just as when you fill in the paperwork to get that baby a Social Security number, then that information would also go to start getting this payment. And then so they're in the system. And that coverage is so much better because you're not requiring people to go to this website, fill out this application. Instead, they're just getting it. So I like the way that was a good pitch.
That's a great example of what I was saying before, where it's so much easier to target the taxes than the benefit. If you have a system in place where everyone's just connected and you can decide to send money, then not only in the pandemic when we did stimulus checks, once we decided we were going to send checks, it wouldn't have taken 3 months to get it to everybody. It could have been in their accounts the next day.
So that wasn't, this, I guess, having it run through the Social Security Administration, like, I don't know how this works really, but so when during the pandemic, where those checks were tied to your, I guess it is a taxpayer ID that you have. So it's, if you had never filed taxes, would they still have been able to figure out how to get the money to you? Or if you'd never, so is there anybody that had actually had a Social Security number received a check during the pandemic?
Yeah. the stimulus checks during the pandemic were,
Mm-hmm.
again, mostly universal. And so if you
Mhm.
did not file with the IRS, you did need to do a little bit of applying for this.
Okay, that's
And in
it.
fact,
Mhm.
Conrad actually led one of the people in the Bootstraps pilot through that process,
Mhm.
where he wasn't paying taxes, but he was able to get the stimulus check, and he was even able to get it direct deposited because the basic income pilot was already providing monthly payment by direct deposit to his bank account. So that was an example of that.
Yeah, essentially, this is a person who was entitled to it, but had never had a bank account before we set him up with a bank account. And so now he was connected to a system and he was findable. He also was a person who was not tech savvy, who mostly the workload to try to get signed up for it and to try to get someone to help him out would have been too hard. I think he probably would have been missed by the stimulus checks. And as a person, off and on experiencing homelessness, he's one of the people who needed it the most. And it was because we had set him up with a connection to a bank account and got him connected to the system. It became much, much easier just to log into the whatever the site was for the stimulus checks and say enter in your bank account information and your social security number, and then it's going to drop in your account like everybody else, and it won't miss you.
And
So the other thing I
go
wanted to
ahead.
thing I wanted to get to is just the again, going to these kind of one-upsmanship with the CTC, is that again we went from the existing is $2,000. Kamala pitched $3,000 or $3,600, and then JD Vance, which is $5,000 with details we don't know, and then Kamala comes out with, okay, we're going to do $6,000, and this is for the child's first year. So this adds like another bracket or kind of segment where if you're from 0 to 1, then you would get $6,000, and then from 1 to 6, you'd get $300 per month, and then from 6 to 18, then you would get $250 per month. So it was interesting to see that you're just like going higher and higher. And also, I mean, the debate happened just last night. I don't know when people are going to watch this, but that debate just happened, and she actually mentioned that $6,000 proposal twice. She's really leaning into that. My guess is, again, because this is one-upsmanship, and instead of even talking about the normal, the expansion that would be $250 or $300 per month, because JD Vance pitched $5,000, then she's leaning into, we're going to do a $6,000 child tax credit. And let's just kind of, not get into the details of the fact that that's just for age 0 to 1, but that's going to help parents a lot who have newborns. And there, again, Policy Engine did an analysis of this. So here's, that page. And they found that doing that would reduce child poverty by 31% and benefit 44% of the population with that.
So still less than if JD Vance is talking fully refundable, which I would assume he probably isn't. But yeah.
So I guess what you're saying is that like the actual amounts that they're proposing in this little game of one-upsmanship are like almost like they'd send a different message to voters, but it's all kind of dependent on how they're structured as to whether it's like what the ultimate benefit's going to be.
Yeah, that is always the key detail. It's actually the amount is less important than people think it is. And again, that ties to UBI too, where people are like, oh, it needs to be $3,000 per month, in order to be impactful, where really the bulk of the poverty reduction and even the reduction of insecurity is just making sure that it's universal, that you're not means testing it in some way that excludes a ridiculous amount of people.
Well, and that reminds me what I wanted to say before too, where the thing that is so key about a universal program is the immediacy of when it's there when you need it. So currently, if someone's going through a crisis, or loses a job, or something happens, has a big expense, and it's going to have difficulty, keeping up on rent or feeding their kids or whatever, then the current process is now go stand in line, fill out all this paperwork, wait a few weeks, see if you qualify. Like, we have someone at their wit's end who's trying to find a new job, trying to find a new way to support themselves. We're giving them a whole bunch of extra work on top of it and making them waste a lot of their time that they should be spending doing as much as possible to get themselves out of that situation. So if you have a UBI, the day you lose, and it's coupled with taxation, that like if you have a high income, then you are paying it back. If you have a medium income, you're paying some of it back, whatever. The day you lose your job and you face that crisis, or a medical accident happens or whatever, and your expenses go way up and your income goes down, it's there that day. It is that floor to land on, rather than like trying to reach for a net as you fall through it.
Yeah, big difference between prevention and treatment. And yeah, there's no possible way of reducing something like homelessness as much as making sure that someone has that money before they become homeless. Like, it just, we're all this argument, even like when the Denver pilot results came out for that first year, and people are like, look how little difference there was between those who got $50 per month versus those who got 500 versus those who got 1,000. Even though there was a significant difference, kind of we expected more of a difference. But even if you look at that and you come away with like, oh, basic income doesn't work, it's not making account of the fact that all of these people were homeless and then they went into this pilot. It's not like you got this money before you became homeless, in which case that is where I think most of the impact on homeless reduction will be, is just actually making sure that people never end up that way in the first place. I think that would have a very significant impact on homelessness reduction because of the fact that you have money in advance.
Same with crime and medical emergencies, all the things that arise from poverty. The best preventative measure is cash.
The next thing, and I guess final thing that I wanted to talk about, again, this has come up during this campaign season, where you had Trump was the first one, and he suggested we should start up a sovereign wealth fund. His logic was that, we're going to have all of this money from tariffs, that we should start up the sovereign wealth fund. And I don't want to get into like how absurd the tariff stuff is. I just want to focus on the fact that he did suggest the sovereign wealth fund as being a good idea. And then Biden, shortly afterwards, also said that we should potentially do this, a sovereign wealth fund. And again, like, both of them aren't like fleshing out the details of what this looks like. But they are kind of just inherently agreeing that let's basically do what I think they're thinking what Norway does. Norway has this, largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. I don't know what it's at right now. I think it's well over $1 trillion in this fund. I don't know how high that is now. But then Alaska, of course, also has this wealth fund in Alaska. Unlike Norway, that pays a dividend. So we don't know, like, none of these candidates, neither of these candidates, or I guess Biden isn't even a candidate now, but neither of them has mentioned an Alaska-style dividend from the sovereign wealth fund. But I still like the idea of the sovereign wealth fund because of the potential of maybe going in the direction of Alaska. Like, it's so much easier to say, let's distribute a dividend if there's actually a big fund versus not having a fund and pushing for this. So I think it's a potentially helpful step forward, where I think of it as like having this kind of permission structure, where if you have when we're talking about universal basic income, and so many people get caught up in this, like, we should not be taxing one group of people and distributing it to these people who aren't doing anything. That's wrong to punish hard workers and reward lazy people. And then we come back with this and say, well, passive income is a thing with even stockholders, where stockholders receive a dividend payment. And Alaska is this example of a UBI that's existed for over 40 years. And nobody worries about, who's hardworking and who's lazy, because of this feeling of deservedness, of sharing equally in this wealth fund. When you look at a wealth fund, you think about it as kind of universalizing, like who should benefit, not just some people, but everybody. And so even if it's not a UBI from the beginning through some kind of dividend mechanism, I think it makes it easier to say there should be a dividend mechanism. And
yes, it's sort
that
of
just
implies
means
it.
universal. Yeah.
Having it being a sovereign wealth fund makes it seem less like, oh, this is the government's money since they took it from us in taxes or whatever. It's our money. It's our nation's money, and it belongs to all of us if it is a sovereign wealth fund, and everyone sort of has a sense of ownership. If you have a sense of ownership, and it's a lot more intuitive to say, I should get a dividend, I should get a claim to some of that.
It really kind of raises the question of like who's managing that fund, and like where are those investments going? Like how is that fund growing, right? Like, is it just, if we're getting the money through tariffs from Chinese goods and then just investing it back in Chinese companies, like what, there's a lot of ways that could go wrong. Like I don't know. I don't know that I only just kind of familiarized myself with this term at all, but like, it does raise a lot of questions. I mean, I see what you're saying, definitely, for sure, that like the idea that like the wealth of the nation is accumulating somehow and is being invested somehow, and the gains from that then go to every person that is in that nation makes total sense. But
yeah, I think looking at the Alaska Permanent Fund is already, it's like a good example of how do you run this kind of thing. And you've got, it's independent people. They're trying to figure out, what are the smartest investments, and it's a mix of smart and safe. They're trying to maximize the return on the fund, but also do it in a safe way. And that return, of course, varies by year, but I don't even know what the average has been. I had to look that up, but they've always been, they've done a good job with that. But it also doesn't even have to be done that way. Like you could kind of do it more like with an index fund, where the funds would just be invested in an index fund, and you're not even trying to determine what is smart and what isn't. It's really just basically investing it in the stock market, the US stock market in general. And there's also like Sam Altman has proposed something, and I also like Matt Brunig's proposal too, and I've proposed this as well. This kind of the way you would do it was that what could potentially happen is you set up this fund, and each year, every single publicly listed company on the stock market in the US would issue, say, 1.5% of new shares into this fund. And so there's a couple things that come from that. First of all, they're not paying taxes. They can't print money, but they can print stock shares. So they're actually just issuing this free money stock shares that they can just print and then put into this fund. And the result of that is it's kind of like a invisible wealth tax, because that would kind of dilute the shares by expanding them a bit. And so the value of the stock would be slightly less. It's like the reverse of a stock buyback, where stock buybacks, help increase inequality because you're just making the value of these stocks worth even more for the rich people who own most of the stocks. And instead, this would slightly dilute that value, and therefore that would reduce inequality through this mechanism. And it's so much easier because there's no way to avoid it. Like there's not these loopholes and stuff that these people are doing. Instead, you issue those stocks into the fund, and then the value goes down a bit, and that's it. But then you would have the entire, collection of companies in the U.S. that are on the stock market, and if on average you're most likely going to see this increase. You're literally investing in the U.S. economy as a whole, the entire stock market. It's like the largest possible index fund, where it's every single company is part of this fund, and it would be entirely passively managed. You're not trying to pick and choose losers. You're just putting that money in that fund.
Yeah, I like that too, where the way it can potentially align incentives. We all want every company to succeed as much as they can, kind of like a pooled tips house for a restaurant. Like the better everyone else does at their tables and their sections, the better my tips look, right? If it behooves all of us for every company to do as well as possible, and the average company to do as well as possible, that's definitely a different situation than when a company goes bankrupt and the only people really affected by it are the shareholders and the investors and the people involved in that company. There's a lot fewer people, gunning for each and every little company to succeed.
Yeah, I think that the incentive structure would also mean that people actually would care about stock market growth, would care about productivity, in which case you incentivize automation. Like you actually would want to encourage companies to invest in automation to become more productive, so that the stock market goes up and then we all benefit. Like right now, when stock market goes up, very few people benefit.
Yeah,
and
what's
so
that
it's
stat? It's like 90% of stocks are owned by 10% of people or something like that. And so when they talk about the stock market going up, it doesn't actually matter to most people.
Yeah, I think it's close to like 1% own 50% of the stocks, and 50% own 1% of the stocks. And I just kind of think of that as a general um, kind of analysis of that. And it's not exactly right, but that's basically where things are.
Yeah, and I was a stock trader for a little while, and I learned what I wanted to learn about, like how stocks work and how things go, and then I started doing startups, so I haven't had money to invest in a very long time. But this feel of the only time it really makes a ton of sense to pay too much attention to stocks and investing is when you have enough money to invest with that, a 5% move is a big deal. Whereas, sitting around with your buddies and saying, well, I put $100 into this stock and $150 into that stock. It's like, maybe in a few years you'll be able to get an extra lunch. And like what's the point even?
Yeah. And I don't know, there's
the cool, sorry, I'm just like big picture thinking about the idea of like, what's the difference between just like, the Treasury issuing money regularly, like it's the same amount every month. What's the difference between that and like dividends from a sovereign wealth fund? And it is actually kind of it's a sort of better idea to have that amount change based on the performance of the country. Like there's something kind of like it seems like a more accurate, trackable thing to do, even though it's an unpredictable amount. I don't know.
Well, yeah. So
dividends are never the same.
It's more a
Dividends are based on
pay-as-you-go
the performance of the company, right?
So it's like a pay-as-you-go situation, as opposed to like the one of the issues with Social Security. People are always screaming that we're not going to have it when it's time for us to have it. Is that a lot of how Social Security works is based on actuarial tables and estimates of how long you're going to live and how long you're going to be on Social Security based on how much money you put into it. So if people start living too long, all of a sudden their numbers are wrong, or if people start retiring too early. Yeah.
There's also there's a way of smoothing this out too. That there's a potential, and so just to get into that just a little bit. Again, the way the Alaska dividend works is that they take the 5-year average, and then they do a percentage of that for the dividend, and you get these kind of, on average, it's around $1,500 per year, but it can, more recent years it's like a low of $1,000, and then more recently it's been as high as like $3,600. So there's that variance, but it's less of a variance because of the 5-year average. But the way you could do this kind of fund that would be different than that, and let's say smoothable, was that so you have all these companies issuing the stock into the fund, and let's say you do it for 5 years first. There's no payment yet. You're just kind of building up the fund, and then what you could do is figure out, like, because it's a 5-year average, you take 20% of that, and then you split that amount, and sell that amount of shares on a monthly basis, or but it could even be, to really spread this out, you could do it like on a daily basis, because you want to minimize the amount of impact that the selling of this has on the funds themselves. So the issuance would happen once a year, but then the selling could happen on a daily basis, and then that income could then go to people like the next year as a monthly payment that is smoothed. So then you would know you could actually, it could be $500 per month, basically every year. And you index it to inflation, so it rises slightly, but then you wouldn't have any variance doing it that way, by having that.
So Alaska, it's not the same every year, right? It goes up and down, kind of. But and you're basically getting last year's dividend this year, like,
and the whole purpose
the full
of it
amount
too,
spread out.
Yeah, the whole purpose of it too is it's a permanent fund. So basically what happens is, they invest the money, and let's say it earns a 10% return. That's like a really good return, but let's say it earns 10%. Then they take that 10% and then they spread that out as a dividend. But then the principal of the fund remains. And they're always trying to build that and even inflation proof it, so that you continue to not lose value in the fund by inflation proofing. So that is a permanent fund. And again, we could do that too with a sovereign wealth fund in the US, or we could kind of do what I just said, where it's kind of like semi-permanent. So you don't care about constantly building up the principal. You would instead sell shares on like a normal basis, and then distribute that as a dividend. It's not as much of a dividend in the sense of it being like an interest payment. Instead, it would be kind of a sharing of the selling of the stock on this like normal basis.
It becomes a really actually poignant and easy way to measure the progress and success of the country, is like, if more people can be directly connected to, if our GDP goes up, if our stock market goes up, if our value of this fund goes up, my payments are going up, and it's a much more specific and more easy to track and actually relevant metric for are we heading in the right direction, as a country? Is my check going up?
Yeah, and like as an example with Nvidia, I think that was a recent stock where that really blew up. Like that had huge returns in a short amount of time, thanks to it being kind of the main AI stock. And if you're just an everyday person, you don't have any stocks, you certainly don't have Nvidia stock, and you're looking at this and you're saying like, I don't care. So what if AI is having this impact and there's all this investing going on, and Nvidia stock has grown so much. But if everybody has some slice of Nvidia stock and you see that AI is having this impact, maybe you think differently about AI. You're happy about Nvidia having this huge return and huge growth because you benefit. And yeah, I think that's so much better. Like, I want people to be happy for companies that are based in the US who are doing well.
Like everyone has skin in the game, essentially.
Right.
Like,
Yeah,
it
I
puts
mean,
us on
like
the same team.
for like putting it into the context of commingle, like it's I think we're sacrificing that kind of like smooth distribution of saying like you can count on $50 exactly every week. We're getting rid of that in favor of like the sort of transparency of how connected that is to the performance of everybody's ability to earn money that week, right? Like, so like having that transparency makes that message very clear of like, no, this money is completely dependent on the how we all did this week, right? And you do lose that kind of like predictability, but it in that way it's performing more like a sovereign wealth fund might, right? And that unless it has some of those like kind of smoothing mechanisms that you're talking about. But it does make me wonder if maybe there is something like what you're talking about, Scott, like that in some kind of way of like handling that fund in the future can be kind of like, we some stability could be added to it, so it's not like you could still track the fact that it's linked to everybody's income, but still like not have it fluctuate, so radically. Anyway, it's good stuff to think about.
Yeah, and on that note too, what do you think? Should I play the commingle in 90 seconds clip just to remind everyone of what commingle is? And
in case people are curious,
talk about
we
that
need to
really
make
quick.
commingle in 5 seconds probably.
Okay, we've got 90 seconds to figure out how to fight poverty and income inequality in America. Let's start with the chart. Here are some people. Here is their income. Some people have a lot. Some people have none or not enough. We can argue about why that is, but let's not. Let's just make this number go up because we care and because it's the 21st century. A ton of research has proven that the best way to make that number go up is with direct cash. No strings attached. So let's agree to set aside a small percentage for whoever needs it more. Let's say 7%. We combine that generosity into one big pile of human kindness, divide it up evenly, then give it back in equal amounts. Look what just happened. These people have more money than they started with. This person saw no difference at all, and these people probably barely noticed. If the average individual income of the group this week is $650, then this amount works out to about $45 a week. That's a trip to the grocery store or a tank of gas to get you to work. That's an extra $180 a month to pay your utility bills or visit the dentist. It's also a nice reminder that other people care, and you're not on your own. At Commingle, we're building the technology to make this all work. With a secure bank connection, we can get a good idea of who needs money and who's got it to spare on any given week. The same connection can be used to transfer funds to or from your account. We can run all the calculations and break down the data so everyone knows how things are going. No forms to fill out, no waiting around for government programs, just a one-time login to be part of a system where everyone has income for the week. We're almost there, but we could sure use some help. Let's make it happen.
It's such a good video, Josh.
Yeah, I've started caveating it with like, clearly we made this while we were doing a crowdfund, but it still works really, really well.
It does.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does not need to be in the context of a crowdfund. And we've seen it, like we've played this during screenings, and people actually understand basic income better just by watching that 90-second clip. Like, it's not even, it goes beyond this commingle mechanism to actually people just understanding UBI just conceptually. And that's
Right.
even why we think it's important. You know, like, I love the fact that basically you can watch that video, or you'll definitely understand it when you are a member of Commingle. But like, if Bill Gates decides to join Commingle, you are not going to complain that he gets the amount too, because he is going to pay
Why
so
is Bill
much into the
Gates getting
system.
$50?
Like,
it's like he just
please,
put
I would
$10
love to
million
pay him
in.
$50.
Shut up.
Yeah. But it, that it's just an ongoing question that we have is like, once people pool that money together, like, can we do something cool with it? Like, to make that even bigger? Like, can that be like somehow invested in some, like,
Or if people are
fund sort of thing?
If they're letting money sit in their accounts, like, we treat that like a sovereign wealth fund and give the community of members cool ways to use it and invest it.
But so far we've come out with, like, maybe not. Maybe it's just actually just be direct about it. It's just going back to people, right? Like, it's sort of a one-to-one conversion. And I think the importance of that kind of like making sense and just cognitively being easy to process is I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, very much keeping it simple.
Mm-hmm. But we've been on for almost 2 hours. Pretty good stuff.
Yeah, let's go ahead and end this. I'll just say, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll be hopefully doing more of these once a week. These will be live streamed, and we'll try to do the live streaming just around the same time we've been doing the spaces on Twitter. So that's aiming for like around Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern. But subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is where this will be on, and also be on the Commingle channel. Subscribe there, and we'll hopefully see you on the various platforms it'll be live streamed on soon too. Like, you'll be able to watch this on X. You'll be able to watch it on Facebook, on Twitch, like lots of different places. And then we'll have live stream chat too, so people can interact with us, ask us questions as we're going on. And then we'll also have occasional guests too, just like we've been having on our the Wednesday spaces.
Perfect.
All right. Well, see you all next time. Thanks for listening.